Tonight on Primetime, Azerbaijan and Serbia move their partnership forward, placing energy at the centre of a deeper strategic alignment and signalling long-term plans with regional implications. A partnership evolving and energy leading the way. Well, good evening. Well, let's focus straight away on that top story, Azerbaijan and Serbia. Now, it's clearly about structure, not just symbolism. After more than a decade of cooperation, both sides are now formalising long-term coordination, linking supply, infrastructure and future capacity planning in a way that could reshape how Southeast Europe sources and secures power. A-News's Orkan Amashov sent us this report.
A few minutes ago here, presidents of Azerbaijan and Serbia delivered their remarks to the representatives of the press. Well, vital strategic partnership between these two countries have been underway for some considerable time, in fact for the past 13 years. And today marks an incredibly important milestone. The very first meeting of the Council of the Strategic Partnership between these two countries has taken place. We were there for the first few minutes of that very meeting. President Aliyev and President Vučić delivered their remarks, and there was a stage wherein the press representatives were not present. After that very meeting, a number of documents signed, in fact 7 documents related to economic cooperation, media, and also, of course, food security and many other areas related to that strategic core of the bilateral interaction between these two countries.
Serbian leader Vučić said the country is entering to the new era of electricity and it needs many energy sources. He added that the Serbian gas company and the state oil company of Azerbaijan held talks on this issue, and a cooperation agreement was signed.
The construction will take more than 2 years. We believe that we will open a gas-fired power plant by 2029. 3 sites have been selected around the city of Nice. We are talking about clean energy. The European Union also recognizes this. In short, the construction is expected to take place in Tripale, Krusti or Niška Banja. However, I think Krusti is the most suitable place. The plant will have a power generation capacity of 500 megawatts. President Ilham Aliyev has promised me that he would personally deal with this issue. You may not believe it, but in 2 years they managed to create a total power generation capacity of 1,890 megawatts.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, in his turn, emphasized that the process of creating this power plant is based on the investment opportunities that exist in Serbia. Aliyev called the investment climate in Serbia positive.
Bir müddet bundan evvel biz Serbiya tabii gazın ihracatına başlamışız.
Some time ago, we started exporting natural gas to Serbia, and today we decided to increase the volume of our exports. Now, Serbia will also convert the gas to be exported into electricity, thereby acquiring clean electricity. This will create opportunities for both the Serbian market and for future exports. Today, Azerbaijan's export potential in the energy sector is 2 gigawatts. This figure will only increase because we are now engaged in the construction of many renewable energy plants and are ready to cooperate with Serbia in this area. We will generate an additional 8 gigawatts of energy capacity by 2032, and a large part of it will be exported. To achieve this, we need new and larger transmission capacities because our main export destination is Europe.
Azerbaijani leader marked that in general, bilateral relations with Serbia in the energy sector are now developing in a diversified manner.
Well, joining us now is Akbar Novrus. He is a geopolitical analyst based in Azerbaijan who's been closely following the evolving relationship between Baku and Belgrade and the broader strategic implications of their expanding energy cooperation. Mr. Novrus, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. From your perspective then, what does this latest step tell us about the way Azerbaijan now views its relationship with Serbia?
Good evening, Mr. Sean. Thank you for the invitation. Well, from my perspective, it is indeed a symbolic and most definitely a significant attempt and a forward step, providing a relationship that will go on even further in the future. And of course, considering the symbolic act of this visit, we can say that President Aliev's official visit to Serbia happened right at the same day with Serbia's National Statehood Day, which adds a great symbolic meaning to it. And specifically, perhaps the relationship between Azerbaijan and Serbia has been have acquired its real political weight on the past decade. And this time we can easily say that it has reached its climax, considering that visit have actually put into fruition in terms of economic cooperation and etc. Specifically speaking on the establishment of a strategic partnership council, which is a high-level mechanism for structured and ongoing cooperation across politics, economy, and specifically energy and other sectors. And the main part, and which is the energy cooperation, which I think, in my opinion, is the main, I would say, the highlight of this visit, and which actually underscores that Baku specifically sees Serbia not only as a partner on the Balkan region, most specifically an important part of its expanding energy footprint in the Balkans and European market.
Yeah, you mentioned energy there. Energy clearly a huge part of this partnership. The commercial benefits are pretty obvious, and both leaders spoke about that. But I get a sense that it also carries more weight than that this is also geopolitically important too.
Yes, definitely. We can agree on the geopolitical part of the agreement, the partnership. Energy is absolutely central to this partnership and has always been a central part for Azerbaijan as well. And in terms of the beyond the commercial relationship, as I stated, the highlight of this yesterday's meetings has indeed been happened in the energy sector, considering that Europe has been redrawing its gas map over the past few years. Specifically, since the Russian invasion on Ukraine, Europe has been looking forward on finding reliable gas partners outside of the continent itself. And Azerbaijan has proven itself most definitely. And we can say that the gas relationship between the economic relationship between Serbia and Azerbaijan, specifically we can say gas deliveries via the Bulgaria and Serbia interconnector, has been operational since the 2020s, and it has turned into a political declaration, into physical force. And we can specifically say on the yesterday, Serbia and Azerbaijan have formalized a landmark energy cooperation with the signing of agreement constructing a gas-fired power plant near the city of Niš. And it has been signed, as I have read on the news, that it has been signed between the Serbia state-owned company, which is EPS, the electrical state-owned company, and Serbia Gas, and of course Sokar, and both three of these companies will most definitely be planning to have a electrical 350 megawatts of electricity and 150 megawatts of thermal energy. And the plant will have a 50-50 ownership between Serbia and Azerbaijan, which in return means that it's more like a zero-sum game, and let's say win-win situation where Azerbaijan exports its gas, puts up a footprint on the European market even further, and Serbia actually meets that demand on the local supply.
Okay, let's just talk mechanisms, process and protocol for a moment. The Council of Strategic Partnership, that has now met for the first time. How significant is that? How does that change the dynamic, do you think?
Well, in the practical meaning, of course, having this kind of Council of Strategic Partnership means that the both countries are not actually looking forward into any sort of simple relationship. They are actually looking forward into having a relationship that would most definitely prosper after having any sort of domestic changes or any sort of political changes that could happen domestically. both in Azerbaijan and Serbia. So with that idea, we can say that it is a institutional and decision-driven framework. They have they have put agreements into implement. This actually enables regular coordination and additional institutions. The institution actually working together. And this actually ensures a continuity across energy, investment, and border cooperation, which, as I said, specifically works as a framework that would prosper and specifically go towards the future of both relationships in the future.
Now, looking to Europe now, Europe's energy market, Europe's energy landscape is evolving all the time. How does this, do you think, strengthen Azerbaijan's position within it?
Yeah, as I said, Europe has been trying to dismantle the dependency on Russian gas, and it has reached this peak ever since the Russian-Ukrainian war. And Europe is actually trying to find a reliable partner. And of course, there are lots of opportunities, lots of, let's say, allies that can be a sort of alternative to Russian gas. But of course, Azerbaijan is actually the main and could be the main player in this category, considering that Azerbaijan already had the infrastructure in the Europe. And as it expands it further, we can say most definitely Europe is actually quite satisfied with this kind of framework, and Azerbaijan coming close to the European continent is indeed satisfactory. Azerbaijan is currently exports natural gas to 16 countries, and latest involvements include the Germany and Austria. Additionally, Azerbaijan is, as President Hamaliyev stated during the meeting, Serbia will convert gas into exporting the electricity and thereby acquiring clean electricity. So that means that SOCAR, who has been the main contractor in this project, will not only exporting oil and gas. SOCAR will be looking forward to exporting electricity starting from 2026, let's say, because we can say that in December of the last year, 2025, SOCAR acquired a 870 megawatts of thermal power plant in Turkey. And this year, we are going to have a 50% stake in thermal power plant for construction in Serbia. So considering SOCAR has focused on producing oil products and petrochemicals, as I said, electricity production will be added to this list as well. So consequently, in the coming years, the percentage of electricity SOCAR's overall production portfolio is expected to increase gradually. So given that fact as well, it actually sits with Europe's main idea and alignment, where they have been planning where they have some sort of a document and, let's say, a strategy named Repower EU, which aims to dismantle European gas. And they have also ratified a document. They are planning to stop importing gas from Russia by 2030 by 100%. So this doesn't actually put Azerbaijan into some sort of a threat or dangerous position. So by exporting electricity as well, they're actually putting their footprint even deeper in the European continent.
Finally, Mr. Novras, the mood music clearly looks very positive. The commercial benefits are clear. But what are the tests, the challenges that both sides will need to overcome if this partnership is to stand the test of time?
But realistically speaking, there isn't any specific threat or danger that could actually alter the energy cooperation between Serbia and Azerbaijan. But it can specifically happen in the political extent, which, again, as I said, doesn't actually look possible, but it is still a possibility. A little 1% of a possibility is still a possibility. We can say maybe any sort of political party changing in Serbia could actually have some sort of effects regarding the relationship between both countries. But I wouldn't think that both Serbia or Azerbaijan would actually think about dismantling the relationship, because at this current state, it actually benefits both countries significantly. And one of the issues that I would actually like to say and mention is the issue regarding Kosovo. People might actually ask the situation between Kosovo, Azerbaijan. Could Azerbaijan actually think about ratifying the sovereignty of Kosovo? I wouldn't personally think that Azerbaijan would actually think something like that on the political landscape, but considering that Azerbaijan has indeed given its answers regarding the Kosovo situation, and Azerbaijan does not actually think about anything regarding that situation. So, giving all that aside, what can we say? What gives this relationship a resilience is that is now built on the shared interests, joint assets, and, as I said, the institutional mechanisms. So if both sides remain transparent and flexible, and I would think that the challenges are specifically and quite manageable.
Mr. Novrus, great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us on Prime Time.
Thank you, Mr. Sean, for the invitation.
Okay, my next guest is the Serbian political analyst, Mr. Nikola Mikovic, who's joining us from Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. Mr. Mikovic, thank you again for joining us tonight. We appreciate it very much indeed. I'd like to understand from your side, from the Serbian perspective, just how significant is this moment in strategic terms?
It could be significant if Azerbaijan manages to increase the volume of exports of its natural gas to Serbia, because as we know, Serbia is heavily dependent on Russian natural gas to this day, and it is under heavy pressure from the European Union and the United States to end its energy cooperation with Moscow, which is why now it's turning to Azerbaijan and to other exporters as well, aiming to improve its position and to diversify its energy imports. So now Belgrade is hoping to get larger amounts of Azerbaijan natural gas. They talk about 1 billion cubic meters, which at this point, in my view, does not sound realistic. First, I think it's rather questionable if Serbia has the capacity to import it, because the infrastructure has not built yet. They're working on it, but it's a relatively slow process. So once it's built, then it might have the capacity. But there is another aspect. Azerbaijan already exports its natural gas to various European countries. So Serbia is on the waiting list. So, but I think in the future, it will increase the imports of Azerbaijani natural gas. It's just a matter of time, although that will not happen overnight. But of course, the two countries will continue to develop their relations. And I think this visit was mostly about energy. As we heard from reports, Azerbaijan and Serbia agreed to build it's a major project. It's a gas-fired power plant in Serbia. If reports are true, then SOCAR will be involved, and also Serbian side, so it will be 50-50 agreement if reports are true. In any case, it is significant for Serbia because it will have to end its dependence on Russian gas sooner or later, so it needs to have the alternative, and Azerbaijan is at this point one of good alternatives for Belgrade.
And it's a very interesting point you make there, and clearly, as you say, there are many ifs and buts about infrastructure, about the possibility of increasing volume. But do you think this sends a message to Russia? Does it send a strategic sort of pointer almost to those that might be watching, that Serbia may start to consider really ramping up other options?
I think it does, and I think the Kremlin is fully aware of that, because Russian Gazprom, according to reports, agreed to sell its parts of Serbian petroleum industry that was owned by Gazprom. So it will sell it, but not to Serbia, not even to Azerbaijan, but to Hungarian MOL company. And also reports suggest that Marco Rubio and Viktor Orban discussed that issue without Serbia's participation. So they discussed Serbia without Serbia at the table, which tells you enough about Serbia's sovereignty. But there were earlier reports that the Sokar could purchase 40 or something percent of the Serbian petroleum industry from the Russian side, which did not happen. Now it will be a Hungarian company, MOL, that will be the owner. But as I said, the Kremlin is fully aware of this, and I'm absolutely sure that they are certain that they cannot do anything to preserve their monopoly in Serbia. And when it's energy, politically, they still can portray to their own audience that they have some kind of influence in Serbia. But when it comes to energy, it's quite clear now that they're losing the ground here, and now other actors will come and replace eventually Russia as a major supplier. Of course, as I said, that will not happen overnight. It's a long-term process. And Azerbaijan, from what I understand, is trying to increase its influence and to strengthen its positions in this region. And Serbia is a good point for Baku.
Yeah, and in terms of specific projects, the proposed power plant, for example, how realistic do you think that is within a relatively short time frame?
Well, in Serbia, things are not realistic when it comes to short time, unless we talk about possible scandals and bad situations like we had in the city of Novi Sad a couple of years ago, which led to large-scale protests. So I think it's better to slow down, not to hurry, just to avoid any incidents. But I think in the future that power plant will be built, because Azerbaijan has a history of significant projects in Serbia. And it started building a significant section of highway in central Serbia. It was a long time ago, about 10 years ago. That agreement was reached during the previous administration in Belgrade, during the Boris Tadic presidency. And Vucic only continued implementing that policy of improving relations between Belgrade and Baku, and now we see the direct results. So that power plant is one of the products of good economic cooperation between Belgrade and Baku.
And for our viewers not so intimately involved in what's going on in Belgrade, just give us a sense of where Serbia is now when it comes to its broader foreign policy outlook. Is what we've seen here indicative of a Serbia looking more towards European ambitions, do you think?
Well, it's been on the so-called European path over the past 25 years, effectively, with very little chances to join the EU anytime soon. But I'm absolutely sure that the European Union supports Belgrade's cooperation with Azerbaijan, because it means the de facto end of its cooperation with Moscow. Now, on the other hand, that does not mean that Serbia will join the bloc anytime soon, as I said. But geostrategically, Serbia is surrounded by NATO and EU members, and it does not have much room to maneuver. So it will be part of those countries in the so-called Western Balkans that are heavily linked to the European Union economically. And as such, of course, it has to look for the alternative when it comes to energy supply. And that's one of the reasons why it's increased volume of imports from Azerbaijan when it comes to natural gas. And also there's a lot of Chinese investments in Serbia, and they also seek cheap gas to continue producing and exporting to the European Union. So for them, this cooperation also is significant. But that does not mean that Belgrade will be allowed by the West to balance between China and Russia and the West for too long. Sooner or later, in my view, it will be forced to officially pick a side and to maybe not directly impose sanctions on the Russian Federation, but to stop doing any serious business with Moscow. It already ceased to participate in military cooperation, military drills with Russia, and the economic cooperation is not nearly as strong as it was in the past. And I think in the future, Serbia will completely, if not completely, reduce its cooperation with Moscow, then at least find some other countries that will replace Russia as a major energy Azerbaijan is one of them. There are other actors as well, Iraq, when it comes to oil. And this country will have to change its foreign policy course in years if the war in Ukraine goes on.
And Nicola, what's the view of the people on the ground? You know, away from the politicians, the commentators, the media, the people on the streets of Belgrade. To what extent are they interested in this particular partnership? And then more widely, what is their view when it comes to the trajectory towards European involvement?
I think they're neutral when it comes to this agreement, because at this point we still don't have that dominant narrative in Serbia that Belgrade must end its energy cooperation with Russia. But I think they are happy about the fact that Azerbaijan does not recognize unilaterally declared independence of Kosovo, which is why they see the country as a friendly nation to Serbia. And from that perspective, of course, they support closer ties between Belgrade and Baku. When it comes to the European perspective that you mentioned, I think people are tired of that narrative because, as I mentioned, the country's been on the EU path for 25 years and there's no progress. There are very little chances of Serbia joining the bloc. Some neighboring countries such as Montenegro or some even mentioned Albania could join before Serbia. So that's why people are quite disappointed about the European Union and the European integrations. And from that perspective, they view cooperate Azerbaijan as a positive aspect of Serbian foreign policy. I'm talking mostly about people who support President Alexander Vučić and his government. Now, when it comes to the opposition, they will always criticize everything that he's doing. Although I don't see any alternative that they offer. But again, as I mentioned, the old administration, Boris Tadić, while he was president, they also had very good ties with Azerbaijan. So I think even if Vučić does not win, his party does not win parliamentary elections, whoever comes over will continue doing business with Azerbaijan and increasing energy ties with Baku because there's no alternative. Things are not going back to pre-2022 level when Serbia was importing oil from and gas from Russia only. So now there needs to be a diversification, and that's what Belgrade is doing. And Azerbaijan is playing a significant role in this process.
Mr. Mikovic, from Belgrade to Bishkek, we thank you very much indeed for bringing us your analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime now. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories of the day. Andy, what is on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, new government data shows that Japan has narrowly avoided a technical recession. AI copyright issues prompted some legal threats. The Warner Brothers takeover saga continues, and there's also some news out of the pharma and auto industry. So let's have a look. First up, Japan's economy posted weak growth in the fourth quarter, missing market expectations by a wide margin. Government data shows GDP rose just 0.2% year-on-year, far below forecasts, as high living costs and weak consumer spending continue to weigh on growth.
Japan's economy struggled to fire up during the fourth quarter. It posted only weak growth and missed market expectations by a wide margin. Government data showed Monday gross domestic product rose 0.2% on the year in the October to December quarter. That was well short of an average 1.6% expected by analysts. It also meant a 0.1% quarterly rise, again below market expectations. It presents Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's government with a key test as it tries to deal with cost of living pressures. Takaichi recently swept to a convincing electoral victory. Her administration has pledged to ramp up investment through targeted public spending. But Monday's data shows the challenges faced by policymakers, especially at a time when the Bank of Japan has held its pledge to keep raising interest rates. The central bank has further said it will normalise monetary settings after years of ultra-low borrowing costs due to inflation and a weak yen. Private consumption makes up for more than half of Japan's economic output. It only rose 0.1% in October to December, cooling from the previous quarter's number. It implied high food costs are still a drag on household spending. Investors will look out for Takaichi's campaign pledge to suspend a consumption tax. The issue led to turmoil in Japanese markets, with investors worried about fiscal problems in a country with the heaviest debt burden in the developed world. Analysts project Japan will continue to expand at a gradual pace this year, though the fourth quarter's weakness suggests the economy might struggle to improve quickly.
Next up, China's ByteDance says it will tighten controls on its AI video tool Cdance after legal threats from Disney and complaints from other studios. Disney has accused the platform of using copyrighted characters and intellectual property, calling it a virtual smash and grab.
Chinese technology giant ByteDance has pledged to curb a controversial AI video-making tool following threats of legal action from Disney and complaints from other entertainment giants. In the last few days, videos made using the latest version of the app Cdance have proliferated online. Many have been lauded for their realism. But the trend has also sparked alarm from several Hollywood studios that have accused the AI platform's makers of copyright infringement. On Friday, Disney sent a cease and desist letter to ByteDance accusing it of supplying Cdance with a pirated library of the studio's copyrighted characters, including those from Marvel and Star Wars. Disney's lawyers accused ByteDance of committing a virtual smash and grab of their intellectual property, including superheroes from Marvel, Star Wars, and various cartoons. On Monday, ByteDance told the BBC that the company is taking steps to strengthen current safeguards as it works to prevent the unauthorized use of intellectual property and likeness by users. Many of Cdance's clips are based on real actors and shows, and some have gone viral since the launch of its latest 2.0 version on 12th February. ByteDance had previously said the product had already paused the ability for users to upload images of real people.
Still with entertainment giants, Warner Bros. Discovery is reportedly weighing reopening sales talks with Paramount Skydance in a move that could spark a fresh bidding war with Netflix for the Hollywood film and TV company.
Members of the board of Warner Bros. Discovery are discussing whether to re-engage with Paramount, which is pursuing a hostile $108.4 billion cash takeover directly with shareholders in a bid to derail an agreed deal with Netflix, according to Bloomberg. Paramount said last week that it would cover a $2.8 billion fee owed to Netflix if WBD pulled out of its agreement, and is offering to backstop a multi-billion-dollar refinancing to eliminate $1.5 billion in costs. So far, shareholders representing less than 2% of WBD's stock have been committed to Paramount's hostile bid, and the company has already twice extended its deadline, which now stands at February 20th. If WBD decides to formally open talks with Paramount, it would need to notify Netflix first, and such a move is likely to kick off a further sweetening of offers. Warner Bros. Previously agreed to sell its namesake film studio and HBO Max streaming platform to Netflix in a deal valued at $27.75 per share. However, Paramount has launched a competing $30 per share tender offer, directly appealing to shareholders while simultaneously lobbying regulators to approve its alternative transaction. Both Paramount and Netflix have indicated a willingness to improve their bids if necessary. Under the Netflix deal, the streaming company is seeking to take control of prized assets, such as Warner Bros., the studio behind franchises including Harry Potter, Superman and Batman, as well as HBO, home to shows including Game of Thrones, The White Lotus and Succession. However, it is not seeking to acquire its global networks operation, including CNN, the Cartoon Network and Discovery Channel. Paramount is seeking to take over the entirety of the media conglomerate. WBD had said it was planning a special shareholders meeting at some point in April to vote on the Netflix merger.
In energy news, French nuclear operator EDF says rising solar generation is forcing costly changes in how it runs its nuclear reactors. The company is now cutting output during peak sunlight hours, increasing maintenance costs as electricity supply outpaces demand.
French nuclear operator EDF said on Monday that it faces increased maintenance costs of around 1.5 million euros to 3.7 million euros a year, as it has to reduce power at its nuclear reactors to respond to increased electricity supply and slow demand. Around 70% of French electricity comes from nuclear power, which makes up about half of state-owned EDF's revenue. But a recent rise in solar power to the grid has changed how the nuclear reactors operate. The increase in renewable energy has led to a fundamental change in how EDF modulates production, causing it to reduce output during the middle of the day, when there is a lot of sunlight compared to previously when it would do this during periods of low demand in the evening or at the weekend, EDF said. Modulation remains a purely economic issue and has no impact on the safety of the nuclear fleet, EDF said, adding that the solution is to increase electricity consumption to meet current production volumes. France released its new multi-annual energy planning law last week, calling for an increase in renewable energy production.
To the pharma industry now, Sanofi says it will expand its Global Capability Center in India's Hyderabad, increasing its workforce to more than 4,500 staff. The French drug maker plans a multi-100 million euro investment.
French drug maker Sanofi said on Monday it will expand its Global Capability Center in the southern Indian city of Hyderabad and increase its workforce to more than 4,500 employees. The center currently employs over 2,600 people. The biopharmaceutical company said that the expansion would be supported by a multi-100 million investment, but did not disclose the exact size of the amount. It also did not specify a time frame for the hiring. In 2024, Sanofi said it would invest 400 million euros in its India GCC by the end of the decade. Multinational companies are increasingly setting up so-called global capability centers in India, which have evolved from low-cost back offices to high-value innovation hubs that support operations, finance, research and development.
And finally, in the automotive sector, Volkswagen is reportedly planning to cut costs by 20% across all brands by 2028. The automaker is responding to weak demand in China, US tariffs, and intensifying competition, with plant closures among the options under review, according to reports.
Volkswagen plans to cut costs by 20% across all brands by the end of 2028, Manager magazine reported on Monday. The Business magazine reported that CEO Oliver Blume and Finance Chief Arno Antlitz presented a massive savings plan at a closed-door meeting with the company's top executives in Berlin in mid-January. The group's cost-cutting initiative is aimed at ensuring returns go back to a sustainable level amid a slump in China, US tariffs, and a competitive environment, the magazine said. Volkswagen launched an operational program across all brands and entities 3 years ago, and has since then achieved savings in the double-digit billion euro range, a Volkswagen spokesperson said. The program has enabled the group to offset geopolitical headwinds such as US tariffs, the spokesperson said. Where exactly the savings are to be made and where cooperation between the brands is to be improved remained unclear at the meeting, Manager magazine said, but plant closures could also be on the table. The Volkswagen representative added that Blume will provide an interim update at the company's annual results press conference on March 10th.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Great update, Andy. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the Board of Peace meeting on Gaza reconstruction and the billions pledged so far. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, the Board of Peace created by US President Donald Trump, is due to meet this Thursday to discuss rebuilding Gaza. Now, according to Trump, more than $5 billion has already been pledged for reconstruction and humanitarian efforts for the Strip.
Donald J. Trump.
Officials from more than 20 countries of the Board of Peace will come together in Washington, D.C. on Thursday for the first official meeting. Announcing on his own platform, Truth Social, President Donald Trump said that member states have pledged $5 billion towards humanitarian and reconstruction of war-torn Gaza. Trump also said that countries have already committed thousands of personnel to the International Stabilization Force and local police. He says that Hamas must uphold its commitment to full and immediate demilitarization, while regional Middle East powers including Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Saudi Arabia and Israel, as well as emerging nations such as Indonesia, have joined the board. Global powers and traditional Western US allies have been more cautious. However, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni announced on Sunday that Italy will join the board as an observer. The board is part of the Trump administration's plan to end the war between Israel and Hamas in the Strip. Both sides agreed to the plan last year, with a ceasefire officially taking effect in October. It was officially created and endorsed by the United Nations Security Council in November 2025 for a 2-year period. However, both Israel and Hamas have accused each other repeatedly of violating the ceasefire.
Dr. Furkan Yolca is a faculty member at Saqqara University, specialising in international relations and regional geopolitics. He joins us as leaders prepare for the first Board of Peace meeting in Washington on the 19th. Dr. Yolca, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Just give us a recap then. Help us understand the core purpose of the Board of Peace and how does it differ from all the other international organizations?
Well, it's a fruit of disbelief of Donald Trump's in the international organizations as it is, because of the way the United Nations and NATO and European Union works is really despised by Donald Jr. Trump, because they require a lot of diplomacy, a lot of bureaucracy, and a lot of time to take action. And this is his way of sort of detouring and taking a bypass, if I'm using the right word, to sort of clone and mimic international institutions, but with a better functionality and faster pace. So that might be a summary of Board of Peace. Institutionally, commitments are done through verbal agreements between the world leaders, but obviously there are signatures, memorandum of understandings, and deals signed between the countries. But as an institution, Board of Peace is not abided by the international law. It's just a ad hoc functioning international institution that's built upon the respect of the international community and the leaders within it, basically.
And we know that President Trump likes action, prefers action to talking shops, to just endless talk. You said yourself there appears to be better functionality, faster pace in this organization. Do you think all of that is going to lead to some tangible outcomes on the 19th?
Well, that's the point, but we never know, because the Israeli part joined later than the founding partners. We don't know how the Israeli inclusion to Board of Peace is going to affect the functionality and the practicality of the institution itself, because you know how it goes. Most of the leaders are going to have contradictory positions with the Israeli party, and we don't know how is that going to work out so far, because up until now, Donald Jr. Trump was sort of handling the Gaza peace process without Israel. So he was trying to take consensus among the Muslim countries of the world or the influential countries of the region, but he didn't really include Israel as a party within the meetings. So now within the later joints or after the foundation, I think maybe 10, 15 days later, Israel also became a member to this. So I don't know how is that gonna affect the functionality, but we should be seeing all parties at the same table anyways if you want a tangible and persistent solution to Gaza and the genocide that happened in Gaza and the war that is still in place actually.
Yeah, clearly a lot of thought has gone into the constitution, the different nations that now comprise the Board of Peace. When you look at nations like Turkey, like Azerbaijan, is it clear, do you think, what Mr. Trump wants from each of those different nations?
Well, with Azerbaijan, it's a different story, and with Turkey, it's different because Azerbaijan has been close with Israel in the last couple of decades, and they are really, close knitted with Israeli politics in terms of political support in the international arena. So I think what Azerbaijan brings to the table is very much different than Turkey's, because Turkey's position has been very much pro-Palestine and very much pro-freedom, to be honest, in Gaza. And what Azerbaijan may be bringing or might bring to the table is the mediatory factor, because there has to be a bridge between Israel and the other parties that are in the Board of Peace, because United States existence merely is not going to be enough for parties to come together and just sign a peace deal because the president of the United States is there. This is not how it works. So I think countries like Azerbaijan might create some bridges, some middle ground that countries can meet in the middle, with obviously several appeasements, because both sides are asking things that the other party doesn't accept. So maybe instead of United States as a patron, these countries like Azerbaijan can find the middle ground and sort of make things closer to reality.
Dr. Georgia, every generation believes that this time the world is changing faster than ever before, don't they? I remember, almost 30 years ago as a university student writing that on pretty much every essay that I wrote. Nevertheless, there is something markedly different, isn't there, about geopolitics at the moment. As a scholar, when you look at what's happening, when you look at the different partners now at the top table, do you think the world is genuinely changing in a way that perhaps hasn't been possible, hasn't been likely over the last 20 years?
Well, a lot of prominent scholars in international relations are now discussing that we are in an era of great power politics once again. That was the case in between the world wars, and this caused a world war so that the world order could be established and founded upon the principles that of the winners, obviously. But now what we see is that the way of functioning, the way of economics work, the way of means of production are owned, and the way that our finances work, actually, the system that the Bretton Woods created and the United States financed all these years are a bit of a bottleneck at the moment, because it seems like the system is stuck in responding to Chinese advancements into a world economy and the hegemony they have built in exports in the recent decades. What I see from my international relations scholars that I admired growing up and read every day is that the system is on the verge of a change, but we don't know how that change is going to happen. Is it going to be happening like the old times where countries come together, build up trenches and kill each other, or is it going to happen in a more subtle way where they defeat each other's economies upon currencies, foreign trade, exchange exchange services, and tariffs, imports? This is the question mark that awaits us to be answered. But more or less, the modern world that we live in should be able to deal with these problems without a World War III. But obviously, there are some old-minded, traditional minds in the game as well, because these countries are not run by only one people, one person, which is the president. There are huge teams behind, armies behind, governments, the establishments. So it's gonna depend how the modern and the traditional thinking of making states work is gonna win over the other. So it's a bit hard question to answer with a definitive answer, you know.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you make. You mentioned there this strategy of defeating each other's economies. Do you also think there's potentially an upside economically when you think about the South Caucasus region, Central Asia, the relationship with Turkey, that if this happens in the right way, in a positive way, that actually there could be huge connectivity and potentially massive economic benefits?
Obviously, I mean, if it happens in the second option that I just explained, it's gonna happen in a way where the world is connected through land, sea, and air. So they are gonna be needing these middle points, which are the Caucasus, to countries like Azerbaijan, Turkey, Kazakhstan. You know, some Middle Eastern countries, some Mediterranean countries are gonna be enormously, using this leverage as an advantage point, because how else the world is going to be connected with from east to west? I mean, that's how geopolitics work anyways. I think if it happens in the second way that we imagine, which is more peaceful, it's going to definitely benefit the countries that are already connecting the western eastern hegemonies. And in terms of energy, in terms of trade, these countries are just in the way of gold that's gonna be dropping on the way. Yeah, so that's how I put it in some of the articles that I write. This gold is gonna travel from one place to the other, but it can't travel as a whole. It's gonna drop pieces on the way, and the countries on the way are gonna get richer if the second option is realized.
Fascinating stuff. Dr. Yolca, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the latest Peace Bridge Roundtable, where civil society representatives from Armenia and Azerbaijan get together for renewed dialogue. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. It's good to have you with us this evening. Now, a bilateral roundtable under the Peace Bridge Initiative took place in Armenia on February the 13th and 14th. Civil society representatives from Armenia and Azerbaijan met in Armenia under the Peace Bridge Initiative. The gathering included core participants and a wider group from both sides. Now, the Azerbaijani delegation entered via a delimited border, completing all procedures. Discussions covered the Washington Summit, peace agenda, regional security, economic cooperation, public perceptions, and civil society's role in building trust. Now, this followed previous exchanges, including a roundtable in Yerevan in October and a visit by Armenian civil society to Baku in November. Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Fouad Karimli, a political analyst who's joining us from Baku. And Mr. Karimli, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How meaningful is this then, in practical terms? Do you think it represents real progress or more just sort of careful optics?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, I think in terms of civil society meeting with the second round of meeting with the civil society, I think it does really reflect the momentum that's been gathering in the past few months. So it's not just, I think, some sort of optics for everyone to look at and see and say that the two civil society groups are getting together, but I've been in a civil society sector for the past few years, and I've had the chance to actually speak to some of the members that were there, and they said that they saw a clear shift in the dynamic of the meeting. So it wasn't just like a meet and greet, like the first instances, but there were people from different sectors, different expertise that actually gave contribution to the conversation as to how the peace agenda should follow, the economic benefits that opening up of communications can have, how trade can move forward, and how like the previous negative stereotypes should be overcome. And I think them meeting themselves in itself is a symbolic gesture of, you know, the two publics, they get together, they can sit together under across one table and discuss these issues together. So it's a bit of both, but the optics side I think has a really symbolic side to it.
Yes, a very, very good point. And when you take a step back and you look at how the two sides have been rebuilding connections, the relationship recently, obviously both sides have been cautious. Not everybody is going to get on perfectly. Of course, there'll be many areas of disagreement. But when you look at the way trust is being very gradually rebuilt, does it give you confidence, at least in the trajectory of where things are going?
Well, I think when we take into consideration civil society meetings, so there have been previous contacts between Azerbaijani and Armenian NGOs and civil society members, but the key factor here was that there was always a third party in play that brought all of them together. And it's sad to say that a lot of those meetings were not so constructive and didn't have such a positive outcome. But here, the key part is that these were bilateral meetings, right? So everyone who was there was actually very involved in the process, supporting the peace process. So we see that in the time of sensitivity, these kinds of points of contact can have both positive and negative outlooks in both societies. But I think, you know, taking it in an incremental sense, so having more and more contact through time, it gives the public from both countries some room for getting accustomed to the situation. Governments, you know, they in any conflict, they're the first line of contact. They negotiate the peace process, but then it's the public that takes it forward. It's the public that actually makes it sustainable. And here we see the human element, the civil society getting together, and it does give the public of both sides an example of how these meetings can take place.
It's a really interesting point, this, because of course we're well used to hearing, not just in this situation, but in many situations around the world, we're well used to hearing how politicians, leaders, diplomats connect with each other, rebuild partnerships. But of course that is an arena loaded with protocol and formality. What you're saying is very interesting, because you seem to be suggesting that the civil society groups add something different, a flavor, a way of speaking, a human element that actually is potentially very advantageous.
Yeah. And also, I think it adds a lot of depth. So every person there, they have a specific field that they have expertise in. So some of the people I know, they're legal experts, economics, social problems. So they all bring that expertise, but also the knowledge that they've gathered throughout the years and the points of contact they had within their society. So it's not necessarily, in my point of view, 19 or 20 people from one side meeting with each other, but each civil society member represents hundreds and hundreds of different groups of people. So they have a voice for all of them.
And just thinking about this careful calibration, the way in which both sides are looking to set the right cadence for improving relations, do you think there is any risk of setting expectations too high, of sending a signal that things are going to happen too quickly?
I think from the public side, there's not that much of an expectation because I think they're not so involved in these processes. So all they're doing is they're observing it, right? But from the civil society and the effect that it can have on governments, I think it's a necessary push, right? So we've had diplomatic processes since August. We've had economic cooperation, some trade going on, grain, fuel, this kind of stuff. But there's never been that human element, that face-to-face contact between the two sides. And I think although it might give people that element of risk, like, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? At the end of the day, I think both sides understand that be peace, right? We don't need to necessarily forget the past or forget everything that each country has experienced. This is something I think the civil society members voiced in there as well. But we also have to move forward. We have to look to the future and say, do we want a peaceful future or do we still want to be in conflict? And I think the answer is quite clear. So civil society is crucial here in carrying that dialogue.
And finally, Mr. Karimli, we know this is about more than just a sort of one or two short-term wins, but nevertheless, from Azerbaijan's perspective, what do you think would constitute a truly decisive step emerging from this meeting?
Well, I think, first of all, the meeting across the border, crossing it by land is also symbolic in itself. So I think one of the first aspects that need to be considered to be a step forward towards peace is both countries recognizing their territorial integrities, demarcation and delineation of borders. These are really important things. And of course, all of this would culminate, hopefully, in a legally binding peace treaty, right? So a finalized peace treaty with guarantees that there wouldn't be any revival of territorial claims. So these are the prerequisites, I think, to have a lasting and sustainable peace.
Mr. Karimli, thank you for your analysis. Great to have you with us on Prime Time.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Marco Rubio's meeting with Viktor Orban following talks in Slovakia centred on defence and energy cooperation. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has now met Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban as his Central European tour continues following defence and energy talks in Slovakia. Let's take a look at this report.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Budapest as he begins the Hungarian leg of his Central Europe tour. Before leaving Washington last week, Rubio said Trump strongly supports Orban, who faces a tough election in April and is trailing in most opinion polls. Orban is regarded as one of Trump's closest partners in Europe and has become a reference point for parts of the American conservative movement, particularly on immigration and Christian values. Rubio later held talks with Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó, pledging closer cooperation with Central Europe as Washington looks to reinforce political and strategic ties in the region. Rubio arrived in Budapest after visiting Slovakia, where he met Prime Minister Robert Fico and President Peter Pellegrini in Bratislava, the first visit by a US Secretary of State in 7 years. Talks there focused on energy security, defense, and NATO cooperation. Rubio stressed that Central Europe would play a bigger role in US engagement with the continent.
We want to work with Europe. We want to work with our allies. We want to work in cooperation with you. And our point has been and continues to be, the stronger you are, both on an individual basis in terms of countries and collectively as an alliance, the stronger the members of NATO are, the stronger NATO is. And under President Trump, this administration is going to make not just Slovakia, but Central Europe a key component of how we engage the continent and the world.
For Slovakia, cooperation with Washington centers on nuclear energy and defense. Fico said Bratislava wants US backing to build a new nuclear unit by 2040 and expand its fleet of American-made F-16 fighter jets.
Okay, joining me now to break this all down is A News's Katie Wilson. Katie, great to have you with us in the studio. Give us a clear picture of this visit then. Who's he been meeting and what have been the main outcomes?
Yes, so this Central European tour, we can say, of Marco Rubio, so it began at the Munich Security Conference where he delivered a speech calling for renewed US-Europe cooperation, calling it a revitalised transatlantic alliance, and then he moved on to Central Europe, as we saw, and Slovakia and Hungary. So these two countries that have conservative leaders, that their policies are quite in line with the Trump administration in terms of immigration, foreign policy, Christian values. So these are two right-wing leaders that are closely aligned with Trump. And yes, they've got warm ties with President Trump, but equally they've maintained ties with Moscow, which complicates the picture slightly, especially as these are countries that diverge from mainstream EU policies like military aid and funding for Ukraine, and they're also the countries that typically resist sanctions against Russia. So in Slovakia, Rubio held talks with Prime Minister Robert Fico, and these meetings focused on energy security, particularly that reliance on Russian oil and gas, as well as defence and NATO commitments. And the key to this is that, as I mentioned, while these other EU countries are securing alternative energy supplies following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Slovakia and Hungary have continued to buy Russian gas and oil, and the US isn't best pleased with this. They want that to change, and equally, Rubio and Fico discussed military modernization, including potential procurement of additional US fighter jets, and voiced support for deeper bilateral ties. So yes, the US is wanting to change these policies, but they are offering solutions and a bilateral relationship rather than necessarily just falling under blanket EU policies. Yes. And Rubio then travelled to Hungary to meet Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a close ally of Trump, and crucially, Orban's government is facing election in April, and that's why we're hearing Rubio describe US-Hungary relations as in a golden era, because Trump wants Orban to win this next election. And there was a nuclear cooperation agreement that was signed during the visit, and that could pave the way for US-linked nuclear technology, energy project. So this visit does have a clear political, ideological dimension, and particularly because Rubio is visiting these leaders that back President Trump's positions, but it is about broader debates in terms of Europe's energy, security, and that relationship with the EU.
Let's just look at defence a little bit now. What do we know in terms of specific commitments on things like troops and other security situations?
So there wasn't particularly many specific commitments here. There wasn't necessarily contract signs or agreements. It was more about bolstering support and bolstering that relation and beginning those discussions. So talks in Slovakia focused on military equipment, notably that Bratislava is looking to expand its fleet of US-made F-16 fighter jets. As I mentioned, there's not a firm delivery commitment yet. We're not that far, but it does signal cooperation on Air Force modernisation. And a big talking point was those NATO spending targets. So as I'm sure you remember, NATO goals have been set under the Trump administration for countries to increase defence spending targets to 5% of GDP by 2035. And the US message is consistent that NATO countries should invest more in their own capabilities rather than relying on US forces alone. So Rubio is pressuring partners on this and backing those minimum targets. And, you know, the US is wanting to see stronger militaries in Europe. We've heard that a lot, but no new funding pledges were announced at this stage. Hungary and Slovakia have raised defence spending to at least 2% of GDP. Now that is actually the minimum threshold, so it's still very short of those broader NATO goals. So yeah, as I mentioned, not at the stage of public announcement of any joint military exercises or specific military commitment, but there is an emphasis there on strategic cooperation in capability building. And I think that's the key here, in that the US is offering that support and that bilateral support as well to help individual countries meet these NATO targets.
And energy is also an area that's been mentioned a lot. Obviously, there are many different components to that. We could be talking about infrastructure, nuclear, gas provision and supply. What do we know yet about the commitments around energy?
Yes, I think that's the biggest talking point here, is it's not just talking about individual deals, it's talking about reshaping the map long terms in terms of where these countries get their energy from. So as I mentioned, two countries that still heavily rely on Russian energy, and that influences their position in NATO, in the EU, and you know, as I mentioned, they're the ones that are typically abstaining or resisting from sanctions. So you know, this has wide implications for the whole continent and the transatlantic alliance, and the US wants to see that change, and they're offering support to do that. So in Hungary, the spotlight has firmly been on nuclear cooperation, think US technology, potential new reactors, and long-term energy independence. And given Hungary's election, that's a message that we're going to be hearing a lot between now and April. And the Trump administration wants to bolster that support for Viktor Orban, and given that Orban's campaign is typically all about energy stability, he's hoping that that partnership with the US, that visit from Rubio, will really support that. Similar story in Slovakia: nuclear projects, infrastructure upgrades, and energy diversification. So Rubio is essentially saying, we want you off the Russian gas, but we've got US solutions ready to go. And the concrete deals or the contracts aren't being signed this week. We're not there yet, but there is strategic signalling there. And it's showing that Washington is backing these countries while nudging them closer towards US energy and defence ties. But as I mentioned, not as a sort of blanket EU-NATO policy, actually focusing on these countries bilaterally and how they can be supported in doing that.
And Katie, what do we know about bilateral relations between the US and Slovakia? I mean, it isn't a bilateral relationship that's spoken about too widely. Where are the two countries right now? What could they potentially look forward to?
Yes, so I think that nuclear energy cooperation is probably the most tangible development here that we can really look at. So Fico actually told reporters that he's hoping for a deal for the US-based Westinghouse to build a new nuclear power plant in Slovakia, and he's hoping that's going to be signed in the coming year. Slovakia has previously signed an agreement with the US on nuclear cooperation. That was during Fico's recent trip to Washington. And ahead of these talks, US officials said Washington was intending to strengthen energy ties with Slovakia and equally, these two right-wing European allies. And the US State Department said this trip was set to focus on energy cooperation and bilateral issues. And I think that's the key thing here, given that these are the two countries that depend heavily on Russian fossil fuels, leading to clashes with Brussels over the decision to cut EU reliance on imports from Moscow. So Slovakia is actively seeking US technology and financing frameworks as a solution to this, to diversify away from Russian energy and bolster energy sovereignty. And Rubio arrived in Bratislava stressing discussions on ending that dependence on Russian oil and gas, and he's framing it bilaterally. So it's more than Slovakia just falling into line with wider policies. It's about a bilateral relationship between these two countries. And there is a signal here. As you mentioned, Slovakia isn't necessarily a country we talk about a lot, but Rubio is signalling that Slovakia's government matters to the US strategy in Central Europe, especially, given that they fall broadly in line in policies. They share that skepticism over EU policies, and equally, Fico is a figure that's mentioned among MAGA supporters as well. And I think that's the question, really. Once this relationship develops, what will that mean for Slovakia's voice in the EU and in NATO? And if we see Slovakia with more autonomy that's, not so dependent on Russian oil and gas, and they can resist pressure from Moscow, what will that look like in terms of wider relationships?
Well, when you look at what the Secretary of State's been saying, his speech in Munich, what he's been saying more recently, as you say, in Bratislava and Budapest, is it coherent? Is the signalling something that makes sense, do you think, or are there some? Because there's been quite a debate about this amongst analysts. What is his message to these countries?
Well, I think if we look at Budapest specifically, I think there's very specific messages to Hungary here and very timely messages to Hungary, given that we've got not only an election in Hungary in April, but actually the most fiercely contested election since Orban returned to power back in 2010. So I think the messaging has been consistent there in terms of the US's relationship with Hungary. Trump supports Orban. Trump wants Orban to win this election. I think that's really been hammered home during this visit from Rubio to Budapest. So he said President Trump was deeply committed to Hungary's success, and he's actually endorsed Orban to secure that fifth consecutive term, despite the fact that Orban is actually lagging in the polls in Hungary. And his opposition leader in Hungary, Peter Magyar, launched his party's campaign in Budapest on Sunday. Now, he's promised something completely different. He's promised to restore Hungary's Western orientation, and he's got concerns about democratic backsliding in Hungary. So in his manifesto, he's talking about tackling corruption and reorientating Hungary back towards the EU, back towards Western Europe. And he's criticised Orban's more frosty relationship with the EU and that continuing proximity to Putin. Independent polls show that he does actually have the lead ahead of this vote. So I can't tell you what Orban's party is promising, as they haven't actually published an official manifesto. They've said that we've been in government for 16 years, so you know the drill by now, you can kind of guess. And I think Rubio's visit in that context, the messaging is going to be really strong here and really significant here. And he's actually been highlighting specific benefits that Hungary have received, such as the temporary US exemption from sanctions on Russian oil sanctions. And Rubio actually linked these to Orban and linked this to the good personal relationship that Trump and Orban have. And I think the fact that Rubio praised Orban, Trump's relationship, Orban's going to really use this as political capital ahead of those elections. And, you know, to the Orban campaign, that's validation from a major global political power. And the question really for voters is whether that good relationship with the US, the golden era, whether that is going to be enough to deter them from the promise of returning to stronger EU relations and a more Western orientation. And very similar tone in Bratislava as well, echoing the value of strong ties with the US and portraying their government as aligned as a counter to not only that dependence on Moscow and Russian energy, but also dependence on the European Union as well.
Fascinating stuff. Katie, great to have you in the studio as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's check in with our correspondents around the world. Britain is tightening its approach to harmful online content, with ministers signalling tougher oversight of tech companies and AI platforms, plus floating the possibility of introducing a minimum age for social media use.
The UK government has announced plans for a sweeping crackdown on tech companies, promising tougher rules to protect children from illegal and harmful online content. Downing Street says the measures will target what it called wild illegal content created by AI and could open the door to a mandatory minimum age for social media, similar to Australia's 16-year-old limit. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said tech companies would no longer be allowed to avoid responsibility. Ministers say they will close a legal loophole that has allowed AI chatbots to produce illegal material under the proposals. Chatbot providers would have to follow the same rules as social media platforms under the Online Safety Act, introduced in 2023. The government is also proposing Jules law, which would require social media companies to automatically preserve a child's data if they die. Officials say they will consult tech firms on further steps, including setting a minimum age for social media and restricting features such as infinite scrolling, which campaigners say can be addictive. Keir Starmer said the law must keep pace with technology and that Britain should lead on online safety. Australia became the first country to introduce a mandatory social media age limit in December, restricting access for under 16s. The UK has not confirmed whether it will adopt a similar limit, but the government says the option is under active consideration. Zena Farizadeh, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Turkey is stepping up its security and diplomatic push as regional tensions continue to shape events. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has been in talks with Iraq's defense minister in Ankara, while Turkey's intelligence chief has been holding meetings on the sidelines of a major security gathering in Munich.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan on Sunday held closed-door talks in Ankara with Iraqi Defense Minister Thabit Abbasi, as Turkey and Iraq continue efforts to strengthen security coordination. Details of the meeting were not made public, but the talks took place against the backdrop of ongoing regional security concerns and cross-border challenges. Diplomatic engagement also continued in Europe. Iraqi Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein met the head of Turkey's national intelligence organization, Ibrahim Kalin, in Munich, where global leaders gathered over the weekend for a major security conference. According to Iraq's foreign ministry, Hussein and Kalin discussed ways of enhancing cooperation between their two countries and reviewed developments across the Middle East. Talks also focused on the latest situation pertaining to a fragile ceasefire agreement that was recently signed between the Syrian government and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. The Turkish intelligence chief also held a series of meetings with his foreign counterparts on the sidelines of the Munich conference. According to security sources, those discussions covered a wide range of bilateral and regional issues, including Iran, Gaza, Syria, and developments in North Africa. Talks also reportedly tackled joint counterterrorism efforts, irregular migration, and cybersecurity. Over the weekend, Germany hosted the 62nd Munich Security Conference, where diplomats from around the world described the current global climate as the most turbulent since the end of the Cold War. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, also at the Munich Security Conference, Georgia renewed its commitment to developing the Middle Corridor as a vital link between Europe and Asia. The country's foreign minister described it as more than a transport route, calling it a secure economic bridge connecting regional markets. Our correspondent has more now from Tbilisi.
Georgia is continuing to position itself as a transit and logistics link between Europe and Asia, with the Middle Corridor remaining central to its foreign and economic policy agenda. Foreign Minister Maka Paçoğlu reiterated this position during discussions held on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, where regional connectivity and Eurasian security were addressed. According to the Georgian Foreign Ministry, Paçoğlu emphasized that the Middle Corridor should not be viewed only as a transportation route, but as a secure and efficient economic bridge linking markets across Europe and Asia. She highlighted Georgia's geographic location, open economic framework, and transit infrastructure as factors that strengthen the country's role within the corridor. The Middle Corridor connects Central Asia and China to Europe via the Caspian region and the South Caucasus, including Georgia and Azerbaijan. In recent years, the route has attracted greater attention amid geopolitical tensions affecting traditional trade channels. European partners and financial institutions increasingly consider it part of the broader efforts to diversify supply chains, enhance energy security, and reinforce regional resilience. The discussion also included Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov and President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Odil Renaud Basso, underscoring the financial and regional coordination required for infrastructure development along the corridor. For the Georgian government, the Middle Corridor remains a recurring strategic focus across international engagements. Officials consistently frame connectivity, transit capacity, and cross-regional integration as long-term priorities tied to the economic growth and geopolitical relevance. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan are stepping up coordination over shared water and energy resources, signing a trilateral agreement aimed at protecting regional stability and managing cross-border rivers more sustainably.
Energy ministers of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan discussed the current state and future prospects of cooperation in managing water and energy resources. The talks focused on ensuring the sustainable and balanced operation of the regional power system, particularly during periods of seasonal peak demand. The sides reviewed coordination of generating facilities, compliance with agreed water use parameters, and joint approach to maintaining stable water regimes in transboundary rivers. Ministers emphasized the importance of mutual support and prompt coordination during seasonal loads, noting that agreed water release schedules are essential for both irrigation and hydropower generation across the region. The issue is particularly pressing. According to the Euro-Asian Development Bank, Central Asia could face a significant water deficit by 2028-2029 if current consumption trends continue. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization data shows that Central Asia faces extremely high water stress, with more than 70% of its renewable fresh water withdrawn each year, mostly for irrigation, highlighting pressure on shared water resources. At the conclusion of the meeting, the parties signed a trilateral protocol, formalizing the agreements reached, reaffirming their commitment to strengthening the reliability of Central Asia's integrated water energy systems amid climate and resource challenges. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
The United Nations says millions of Afghans are heading into another year with urgent humanitarian needs still unmet. A new UN assessment highlights the scale of the shelter crisis, while UNICEF warns that nearly half the population required assistance last year. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
The United Nations Human Settlements Programme, or UN Habitat, says 4.2 million people in Afghanistan are in urgent need of shelter and non-food items this year. The agency shared the figure on its official X account, stressing that adequate housing is the first step toward a stable future, and warning that action to address the crisis cannot be delayed. UN Habitat said proper shelter is essential for stability and called for swift intervention to support vulnerable families. The warning comes as humanitarian needs across the country remain widespread. In its 2025 annual report, the United Nations Children's Fund said 22.9 million people in Afghanistan, nearly half of the population, required humanitarian assistance, including around 12 million children. UNICEF identified climate shocks, economic recession and unemployment, as well as the continued exclusion of women and girls from education and much of the workforce as the main drivers of those needs. Aid agencies have repeatedly warned that declining international funding, combined with economic hardship and climate pressures, is leaving millions of Afghans without basic services, shelter, or food security. With winter conditions, large-scale returns from neighboring countries, and continued funding gaps, humanitarian organizations say the need for shelter and essential support is likely to remain high in the months ahead. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
And before we go, let's take a look at a couple of other top stories making the headlines. Ukrainian, Russian and American delegations are due to meet in Geneva on Tuesday and Wednesday. Talks come as US President Donald Trump seeks to push through a deal to end Europe's biggest war since 1945.
The United States, Ukraine and Russia are set to meet in Geneva on Tuesday for talks aimed at ending Russia's war in Ukraine. The two-day discussions follow two earlier rounds of trilateral talks held in Abu Dhabi in January and at the start of this month. Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will represent the United States, while the Kremlin said aide Vladimir Medinsky will lead the Russian delegation. Medinsky, who headed Russia's team during previous negotiations in Turkey in 2022 and again last year, is returning to the role. It's a move that could indicate Moscow expects discussions to expand beyond security concerns to wider areas of dispute. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian delegation will be led by Rustem Umerov, head of the National Security and Defense Council. The announcement comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed hope that US-brokered peace efforts would be serious and substantive, while warning that Ukraine was too often being asked to make concessions. He called on Ukraine's allies to take stronger action, including imposing additional sanctions on Russia and maintaining weapons supplies to ensure Moscow engages meaningfully in negotiations. Nearly 4 years into the conflict, and despite sustained efforts by US President Donald Trump to end what he has described as a senseless bloodbath, the two sides remain divided on key issues, including territorial control. Zelensky has rejected proposals involving the exchange of Ukrainian territory as part of any settlement, saying such a move would affect the livelihoods of around 200,000 people living in the areas concerned. The latest talks mark a continued diplomatic push to de-escalate Europe's deadliest conflict since the Second World War.
And finally, Lunar New Year, or the Spring Festival, falls on February the 17th this year. It's the most important date in the Chinese calendar, marked in China and across Chinese communities worldwide. And once again, it's on the move. Hundreds of millions are travelling home, turning what's often called the world's largest annual migration into another record-breaking rush.
Hundreds of millions of people crisscross China during Lunar New Year holidays each year,
to reunite with families in their hometowns, making it the world's largest annual human migration. Official estimates predict a staggering 9.5 billion inter-regional passenger trips over the 40-day period, which runs until March 13th. As with every year, the 2026 travel rush stands as a spectacle of logistics. Officials project that self-driving will remain the dominant mode of transport, accounting for roughly 80% of all trips. Meanwhile, rail and civil aviation are expected to reach historic peaks, with passenger trips hitting 540 million and 95 million respectively. China is also using AI technology to reduce crowd congestion and assist staff in preparation for the Spring Festival. As large crowds of passengers filled the station, police robots were deployed at Guangzhou South Railway Station, one of the peak times for travel in China. Preparations for the Lunar New Year are also stealing the spotlight in Indonesia and Malaysia. In Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, residents crowded the Glodok Pangkaran street market on Sunday as excitement built ahead of the upcoming Chinese New Year celebrations. Many people visited the market, one of the city's well-known shopping spots, to purchase traditional decorations, red lanterns, festive ornaments, and food items associated with the holiday. In Malaysia's capital, Kuala Lumpur, similar traditions are drawing attention. In Chinatown, colourful inflatable horse lantern puppets paraded through the streets, accompanied by the rhythmic sounds of drums and gongs, ushering in the Lunar New Year festivities.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. We'll be back again very soon with plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.